Okay, so you guys who are watching me on the stream right now, hope it's coming through okay. We'll just be jumping into the space in just a moment. Just getting everything else set up. Hope we're all doing well. If you guys are watching on Rumble, YouTube, etc. I won't really have much time to check the chat. Obviously, going to be very, very busy, but thank you so much for bearing with me just as we go into... So, we have debate night. Restore Britain versus NRP with Alek Yerbury and Dan Haley. So we're just going to start the space now. Hoping that this is going to come through okay. Yes. Allow this time. Microphone in use. Hopefully that is still working because I'm transmitting through OBS. Okay, shut my door. Okay. I'm hoping that we're live. I've never done this before, so I apologize if it's awful. I hope it's not too bad. Alright, Matt, how you doing? Oh, am I muted? Am I muted? Oh, okay. Oh, am I coming through now? Ah, there we are. I think I was muted. Okay, so I'm just gonna go full screen on this. All right, you guys can't really see the space. Okay, can I go full screen on this? No, I can't. All right, let me quickly zip back out of that. Sorry guys, for those who are in the space, I don't know, I'm just live streaming this on YouTube and Rumble as well. So I am just going to adjust the screen just a little bit. Should hopefully have a good night awaiting us. You can see everyone in. There we are. That'll do, donkey. That'll do. Okay. Please bear with me while I try and figure this out, guys. If there's a way that you guys can let me know that I'm coming through okay, please do so. Right. How does one manage space? Right. Invite speakers. That's one. And I'll do the other in a moment. Oh God. Screwed that up. Okay. Oh, shit. So many devices running at one time. You can hear me okay? Awesome. Okay. Dan, Dan, you should have been invited to speak. I will send another invite. There we are. Just make sure that my oh, wait, I just realized something. Why I probably can't hear anything. Okay, now my really screwed that up. So many settings going at once. There we go. Now my audio's coming through my headphones. Right, Dan, you are muted. Can I unmute you? Oh, hang on. There we go. I've just seen Alex come in. Is he too? Let me send that. Okay. Approve. Yes. Apologies, guys. Just heads up. First time I'm ever running a space, let alone moderating a debate. So I did approve your request, Alek. So
yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Can you hear me, mate?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Fantastic stuff.
I'm on my laptop this evening instead of my phone, so I hope it works fine. If I drop out for some reason, it will just be because of that, and I'll switch over to using my phone.
No stress. I'm on my computer as well. So for you guys to be aware, This space is not only on X, I am also live streaming at YouTube Rumble as well. It's acting as a backup recording should anything go wrong. And obviously if you want to go follow me there, then you can. But we've got a debate here tonight. Restore Britain versus NRP. Alek Yerbury and Dan Haley. Hope you guys in it enjoy. Very much so looking forward to it. There's going to be some things which I'm just going to sort of declare first off, I suppose. I don't think any of this should come as a surprise to any of our speakers, really. So, first off, a note about myself, that I am indeed a Restore member, a paid Restore member. So, that was declared up front behind the scenes. As far as I am aware, it's not going to come as a surprise, but it's important for you guys who might be listening either now or in the recording to be aware of that, okay? You know, if you can't eliminate biases, they at least need to be put out there and be made as transparent as possible. Dan was also in attendance with me at the Wolverhampton demo, which you can go and watch the full report for now. However, it was unaffiliated with Voice of the Valleys or anything like that. Okay, so today we have Dan Haley, Outpost writer and self-described nationalist, and we have Alek Yerbury, the NRP leader. So what I thought we'd do, guys, wasting as little time as we can, is, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know if it's up to me to unmute you guys or you guys can unmute yourselves as well, I don't know, that I believe it was Dan that issued the sort of the debate challenge. So I figured we'd give Dan a little bit of time to sort of outline why he wanted this debate, who he is, the kind of things he'd like to go into, and stuff like that. And then Alek will also be given then an uninterrupted time to respond. We'll set it roughly around 5 minutes. I'm going to keep it just timer on my phone here. And if you don't want to use a whole 5 minutes, if you get everything out in like 3 minutes, just say, you know, yield my time or whatever, and we'll move on to the next one. But after that, then I pretty much want it to be the case of I don't really have to get involved, kind of like, you know, any kind of sporting environment or anything like that. The less you see of the referee, usually the better. So just a case of I'll jump in if it starts to get a little bit, you know, either too off the rails or again, if it's constant interruptions or anything like that. But ultimately, I think you guys are going to be pretty good at self-moderating as well to sort of help me out with my incompetence and lack of experience with spaces. So I'll throw it over to you then, Dan, first off, if you're hearing me, to give a little bit of an opening statement, if you will. I'll have 5 minutes on the clock, and I'll let you know when that 5 minutes is up if it gets to that point. But basically, if you want to unmute or if you need me to unmute, let me know to outline why you wanted this debate, the things you want to discuss, all those kinds of things. When you're ready, I'll start the timer.
No worries, mate. Yeah, so as Voice of the Valley said, yeah, I would describe myself as a nationalist, and it took me a long time to get to that point. But I also I joined Restore Britain the day it launched as a political party, because it was a political movement before that. And obviously, I do have my reasons, and many other people have their own reasons, but I can only speak for myself. And just to clarify as well, I am only, bear with me, sorry. I'm only a Restore member and volunteer, so that's as far as kind of my own remit goes. I'm not a spokesman for the party, and I don't claim to be. So I'm just merely a member and a volunteer. But yeah, I wanted to kind of get this debate going because me and Alek have had a few interactions on X. And I wanted to kind of challenge him on some of the points he raised while on the Unity News Network with David Clues, talking about Restore Britain. So I felt it was kind of high time, rather than kind of have a.
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Did Dan drop out?
I think he might have accidentally muted himself.
Right, I'll pause the timer. Dan, don't worry, your timer's paused. I say his audio's completely disappeared, so I don't know whether he might have dropped. I'll just we'll we'll give it a minute, because that was around the time where I think he was about to start getting into the main points. So, always the same.
Yeah, no worries.
Always the same in Britain. Oh, there we go. We have a reaction from him. We have a reaction. Technology is great when it works, isn't it, guys? Technology is great when it works. And I apologize. You could have had a far better entertainer than me for this interim. Yep. Oh, Daniel.
Sometimes these spaces do glitch. It's just an unfortunate thing. So I'm sure it'll be back in a minute.
He's just trying to find out where he is. Okay, I think he should be back in just a moment. Not exactly sure what happened.
It might be that he has to leave and come back in and then come back up.
I think that's what he's had to do. I think that's what he's had to do. So we are off to a fantastic start. Quickly check the... Oh wait, I can't check the stream chat at the minute. Oh well, never mind. We've got our backup recording going, so we do this now. Kenny NRP, appreciate the follow. Thank you so much. James L, if you're here, appreciate the follow. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm doing super chats or something on a stream now. Oh. Apparently, it's glitching for some people. Alec, can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. It's not showing me up as it's still showing me up as being muted, but I can still hear everybody. It's updated a bit now. I can't see Dan in the space anymore. I assume he's left and come back in.
Yeah, I think he's trying to, because you're on as a speaker for me, so this is good. Internet upgrade's not going so well on my end by the looks of it. You need to make him a speaker if he quits and comes back. Yes, okay. He hasn't come back. He hasn't come back in for me yet, though. That's the only thing. Let me have a look. Yeah, he's not here. Oh, there he is. Right, okay. There we go. I've invited him to speak, so hopefully, please be the end of any technical difficulties. Please. I don't ask for much. Send him another speaking invite. Just quickly check. Yeah, everything else seems to be going okay. I appreciate the follow, Alec. Thank you.
No worries.
Is he back? Yeah, it's all. I don't know whether then, just in the interest of time, I suppose maybe switch over. If he does manage to get back in the next sort of couple of minutes. Alec, do you want to give, in the interim, sort of your thoughts on, I don't know, maybe what you're expecting when you come to this debate, your interactions with Dan in the past? Is there anything you want to give just in this time whilst we wait for Dan to come back?
Well, yes, actually, and hopefully hopefully he can hear what's being said. That would be helpful. But I think one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and I would have done this anyway, if I was responding to him because I think it's relevant, is I think that it's important to get an understanding, or at least agree to an understanding of what political parties actually are and what political parties are actually for. Because I think having that understanding will kind of inform a lot of the thinking on whether a political party is good or not. Now, this is what I would describe as what political parties are for. So in a parliamentary system, a political party exists to be an organized unit for some kind of political ideology or some kind of set of political ideals, i.e., the point of a political party is to be a mechanism by which some kind of political ideology is implemented. And I think that is the case in any parliamentary governmental system. For example, the point of the Conservative Party or the Conservative and Unionist Party is to advance the interests of conservative and unionist ideology. The point of the Labour Party is, or at least was, to advance the interest of socialism as an ideology. The point of the Liberal Democrats is to advance the ideology of liberalism. The point of and I'm going back historically, the point of the Communist Party, or the point of the Bolshevik Party of Russia was to further the ideology of communism. The point of the Green Party, I would say, is to further the ideology of libertarian Marxism. So the fundamental point I'm getting at is that the reason political parties exist is because in order for some kind of political ideology to be manifested in a political system, there has to be a conduit to do it, and I would reason that conduit is a political party. So the conclusion then that I would draw is that in order for a political party to actually have function as a political party, it has to be able to have at least some kind of ideological aim or some kind of set of ideals, because otherwise it's not really a political party except by technicality. It's just an organized entity of people. I think there has to be some kind of aim and objective, and of course, when you register a political party with the Electoral Commission, you have to actually provide a set of aims and objectives. And I think that ties into the fact that there has to be some kind of ideological basis for a party to exist. And I'm talking about this because it's not specifically relevant, just in case he can't hear me. But I think he would. I think he would agree with what I'm saying about why parties exist and what parties are for, because it's not specific to any particular party. And I think with those points in mind, the point to then think about is what is the basis of a political ideology. To have a coherent political ideology, I would say there are three fundamental aspects to it. Firstly, there's got to be some kind of social aspect. There's got to be a plan for how society is organized. Secondly, there has to be an economic aspect, i.e., there has to be a plan for how the economy will be organized. And thirdly, there is a political aspect, which is how the government or the governing bodies of society will be organized. For example, to take the Conservative Party as an example, its social political ideal is social conservatism and traditionalism. Its economic ideal is capitalism, and its political ideal, I would argue, is liberalism, because it believes in very individualistic small government. Likewise, I would say for something like the Labour Party, its social ideal was, or to some degree still is, Marxism, its economic ideal was socialism, and its political ideal, I would argue, is probably more statism. But the point being is that there's the ultimate point I'm getting at is you've got to have a fundamental ideology behind a political party. Would you say that is a fair conclusion as to what a party is for and why it should exist?
Great. So what I'll do is now I'll throw it because I think he's back in as a speaker
now.
He's
back
so,
now. I
think
couldn't see him drop back in, but.
No, that's okay. I was gonna say to start rounding it up there. Basically, it's kind of good. We'll sort of take that as kind of like an opening statement, and I think it's pretty much around the same time anyway. So, Dan, I don't know if you want to sort of pick up from where you left off and address some of those points, but yeah, you're free to unmute now if you're able to, and take this wherever you want in response.
Hello, chaps. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. So I just need to know exactly how much was caught before I dropped off, because I I was talking for like 4 minutes. So how much was picked up exactly? Not much.
Oh yeah, I think it was going to get to the point you was about to get into sort of your first main points. You mentioned that a lot of your stuff was around things that were said on the Unity News Network, and it wasn't long after that it cut out. My timer was actually about 1 minute and 24 seconds. Yeah, I don't know if you want to pick up from there and address some of the things which you've heard. I'm not really sure how much of that you would have heard, obviously. Hopefully you would have heard pretty much all of it, and you're able to respond to that however you please.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. That may have been an issue on my end, you know. But hey. Anyway, yeah, I was going to. I did hear all of what Alex said there, and I don't disagree with a lot of what he said. But my broader point was, as I was getting to, is that I would assume that Alek, you would not that Restore Britain would not qualify as a political party in your mind, because from what you've said in terms of when you went on the Unity News Network, you described it such terms like a populist grievance engine, and many other terms like a marketing scam. So considering that the party is like barely 2 months old, why do you say this? I just kind of want to get an impression in terms of where the reason is coming from here.
So the reason I say that is because, bearing in mind what I was saying before, and I didn't necessarily think you would disagree with what I was saying about what a political party is for, you know, vaguely, which is fair enough. But it was just trying to get the semantics point. But when it comes to Restore Britain, the reason I describe it as a grievance engine and a marketing scam is because, as a party, there are people in it who are ideologically driven. Specifically, Rupert Lowe does actually have a governing ideology behind his entire political character. But the party as a whole is not ideologically coherent. There are huge differences in the political ideals between all of the people in it. There isn't actually a coherent set of principles. Now, it does in fact have by default an ideology, and the ideology is the ideology that Rupert Lowe has, because a political party which doesn't have ideology as a party can therefore only ever function as an extension of the individual who leads it. Therefore, the only ideology it can ever really follow is the political ideology of Rupert Lowe. Now, I describe it as the grievance engine and the marketing scam because of the fact that even though Rupert Lowe himself has ideology, the party that he leads does not, and therefore people are effectively being solicited to join it on the basis that the party reflects their political ideals, when in fact it doesn't reflect the political ideals of anyone or anything except those of Rupert Lowe himself. So I think there's like an inherent disingenuousness to that, and it's not the fault of the people that join it. But I think that it comes down to the fact that a functional political party, because it exists to be a conduit of a set of political principles, it has to actually have that set of principles before it comes into being. It can't just shoehorn them in afterwards. Do you kind of understand my argument?
Well, I just have to push back on a little bit there, because obviously Rupert Lowe is one man. Yes, he is the leader of the party, but he very much views the party as kind of like a collective effort. So there are people around him, a relatively young team actually, like your Charlie Downs, your Harrison Pitts, your Lewis Brackpools, and obviously Charlie himself may not necessarily have some of Rupert's own ideas in regards to obviously the role of the state. And he's been very transparent about this. And they are very transparent in terms of some of their internal disagreements, which is healthy for a party, unlike Reform, which I would describe as a personality cult, because it's very much Farage and then everyone below him. But I don't see Restore in that mold at all. It's a growing party. Like I said, it's barely 2 months old. Yes, obviously the underlying ideology is a bit paper thin at the moment, but there are policy papers coming out. There are policies already there. And in terms of your own national agenda, Alec, you might find some policies in there that you may even agree with, in terms of reinstating the death penalty and other such matters as well, because I know that's one of yours. So you can see how people like me would have attached themselves to Restore, and I did it out of pure necessity, because I felt that even though we will live past 2029, we still don't have long in terms of the grim state of our demographics, in terms of where we are as a people and as a nation, and the kind of the state of the whole rotten system as it is. It does need some top-down change, and I think Restore wants to deliver that. They want to hold it to account. But there is a degree of transparency, like I said, in terms of some of the internal disagreements, which is healthy. That's healthy for a party, So I don't believe that, even though Rupert is on all the leaflets, yeah, sure. But I mean, he's but one man, and there are many people around him, who do support him, who do believe in the things that he says. Obviously, what he says and what he does are two different things. And I'm a firm believer in, obviously, deeds over words. And Rupert has promised to deliver the most comprehensive mass deportation plan. He did it. He promised to deliver the rape gang inquiry, the rape gang inquiry, sorry, and he did it. So again, you can see why certain people would gravitate towards him, because unlike many politicians, in fact, most politicians, Rupert is true to his word. Whether you believe in that or not is neither here or there. But people, I am a firm believer in deeds over words. So the fact that he's delivered on his promises so far is promising. And yeah, I describe myself as a nationalist, but then I understand that, as much as I respect, a lot of the nationalist parties, British Dems as well, I felt that we need that kind of radical change within the next few years, as opposed to, in the next 10 to 20 or maybe even 30 years. So yeah, that's kind of my reasoning. But you say that a lot of people joined Restore out of desperation, like the likes of Steve Laws and Zuma historian. Obviously, I can't speak for them. I can only speak for myself. So what would make you think that it was out of pure desperation? Exactly. Could you explore that a little bit for me?
Yeah, I can. So I'll start kind of to the points at the beginning, and then I'll get to that at the end. So, one of the when we're talking about like ideology, and you describe yourself as a nationalist, and as you point out, there are those differences in opinion between various people in Restore Britain. Now, the issue I would say exists there is the fact that, because it is obviously a party whose political ideals are therefore highly whimsical to the beliefs of Rupert Lowe, i.e., the party's ultimately going to reflect his beliefs. Yes, there might be people around him who disagree, but the party will reflect his beliefs. I think, therefore, the question that you've got to ask is, what is the political ideology of Rupert Lowe himself? Like, what is, because he does have a political ideology, and that political ideology is the same political ideology as that of the Conservative and Unionist Party. He is socially a conservative. He is politically a liberal. And he is economically a free market capitalist. He is, for all intents and purposes, a conservative in the ideological sense. He is not in the Conservative Party, but he is ideologically a conservative and unionist person. In the same way that, you know, Jeremy Corbyn is not in the Labour Party, but his ideology is exactly the same as the ideology of the Labour Party. And so, what my argument therefore is that actually, you know, Restore Britain is, you know, does actually have an ideological framework that it will ultimately be governed by, and that framework is actually the complete opposite of any sort of revolutionary radical national program. And that ideology is conservative liberal free market capitalism. Now, to get to your point on the desperation side, the reason that I can understand why people think that joining Restore Britain is a good idea. I can understand why they think that. I think it's wrong, but I can understand why people think that. And the reason why is because most people, especially within the sphere of nationalist politics, have absolutely no political agency whatsoever and have very little knowledge of the political system or how the political system works. And I'm not, that's not me, you know, denigrating anybody. That is an objective fact. There is very limited knowledge of how the political system even functions, let alone participation in it. And ultimately, what a nationalist person therefore has is two choices. They have one choice, which is to do what, you know, for example, the socialists did in the latter half of the 19th century, which is go and learn how to create a political movement themselves, which is a period that takes years or even decades, because it's very difficult and it takes a huge amount of work. If you look at how long it took for organized labor movements in the late 1800s to actually transition to the Labour Party being in government, you're talking a period of 50 years or more. If you're looking at, for example, how long it took communism to transition from Karl Marx to the Bolshevik Party taking power in Russia, again, you're looking at a period of 50 years. But the other option that people have is to piggyback on something that already exists, in the belief that by doing so it will expedite that process. And the reason people do that is because of desperation, because they think, well, I don't have time to spend 50 years creating a political movement. I have to try and do something within the next 2 or 3 years. Therefore, my only option is to piggyback on something else to try and speed that process up. But my argument is that ultimately doing that does not actually work, because if you piggyback off of something else, if you is, you know, somebody who chooses to be a passenger in Rupert Lowe's political party is therefore ultimately choosing to be a passenger on the bus of free market liberal free market capital and liberal conservatism. So in other words, they're choosing to just be a passenger of the conservative movement and the Conservative Party. And I think the problem, of course, associated with that is that what they're then doing, rather than actually creating the foundation for a revolutionary political movement that can replace those old broken ideologies, what they are then unintentionally doing is just providing life support for a dead political ideology and perpetuating it for another few years. And This is why I say it's desperation, because when people are desperate, and if they can't control their desperation, they will often do things that are like panic responses, but they don't think about the long-term implications. And my argument is that if people, if you stop, if you don't panic, but you stop and you assess what parties like Reform, Restore, Advance, what those kind of parties are, if you stop and objectively assess, you then realize that actually all those parties are going to do is perpetuate the conservative ideological movement for another generation. And you realize that the only way to actually get out of that is to do the harder thing and go and create something new, even though it's harder and even though it's going to take longer. And yeah, I don't know if you want to say any your views on any of that.
Yeah, well, like I said, you do make some reasonable arguments, but the thing is, Alec, is that I noticed like you do make certain like blanket statements and like snap judgments that you present as fact, but it's just actually your opinion. So in terms of like the Unity News Network interview that you did with David Clues, I believe you said that that in order to support parties like, say, Reform or Restore, they would have to live in like a mental cult environment where they don't speak to anyone or don't have any source of info, other than, say, like X tweets or what have you. You can correct me if I'm misquoting you, but I think you said something to that effect. But not only that as well, you say that they work for kind of terminally online fan bases, and that in terms of just, I don't know, it's the kind of, I wouldn't call it arrogance as such, because I don't think you do it out of arrogance, but maybe it comes across that way in terms of like some of these, like you say, I think you said that Restore is worse than Labour. Like, I mean, like how do you qualify that kind of statement? And you said it so, you said it just, so, haphazardly, like you just said it so quickly, as if you kind of believe that yourself. Worse in terms of the current incarnation of the Labour Party and the Stammer, or worse historically as the Labour Party? Considering Restore is barely 2 months old, Alec, I can't see how you would make that kind of statement that Restore is worse than Labour. So I just kind of wanted to kind of challenge you on, like, some of these kind of comments, which as you know, I have kind of pointed out to you on some of our various interactions on X.
No, fair enough. So the reason why I make the commentary about how it's a party that can only exist in a communications bubble is because of the fact that it does have that semblance of ideological foundation in Rupert Lowe, and that ideological foundation is that of Rupert Lowe, which is, in a nutshell, Thatcherite capitalism. But the problem you've got is that the disconnect between the political ideology of Rupert Lowe and the aims and objectives of a huge number of people, especially the sort of, shall we say, not Tory group, the nationalist group that have joined his party. Their political ideals are totally incompatible with those of Rupert Lowe, and they lead to totally different outcomes. For example, the political ideals of Rupert Lowe are the exact same political ideals of Margaret Thatcher, which are the exact same political ideals as Boris Johnson, which are completely incompatible with the political aims of people like you, people like myself, anybody that wants any kind of nativist, ethnocentric society, which inherently requires a form of economic socialism and state totalitarianism, that it's completely incompatible. And the reason why I make the point about it's the kind of party that people could only support in a bubble is because as soon as you make people aware of these incompatibilities, as soon as someone recognizes that these incompatibilities exist, they're immediately their whole attitude to it changes, because immediately they have to effectively continue to exist in a state of denial in order to reconcile those two incompatible ideas. And I mean, I've seen, because I do read the things you write, and you wrote that good article. You know, it was quite a detailed article. I didn't agree with it, but it was a well written article where you even yourself identified these Thatcherite free market capitalist tendencies in Restore Britain, and you identified how incompatible that was with the worldview that you have, and with and to a degree with the aims and objectives that it talks about. And what that is effectively saying is, you've already noticed that there is something amiss with that, but you're still in it anyway. You know, you still support it anyway, because, you know, in your belief, you have to try and do something now. But the point I'm making there is that when you present a party like Restore Britain to the general public, the average person the average person's ability to go along with that will only persist until somebody presents them with that evidence and that information and says, well, hang on, but do you realize that the ideas being said by the guy who runs this party and the things this guy believes in are totally inconsistent with what's written on this piece of paper? And as soon as somebody like sees that, they can't unsee that. And so it becomes this political movement where it relies on keeping people in an informational bubble in order to keep them supporting it. And it's not the only party that does that. I actually would argue that um, the whole of right wing conservative esque politics is like this, where it relies on keeping people in a state of relative ignorance in order for people to support it. Because as soon as someone becomes like aware, as soon as someone actually thinks about what they're doing, they start to see the inconsistencies, especially if it's someone who is very focused on immigration and demographics as a problem. As soon as you point out to them that actually right-wing ideology has caused all of the immigration and demographic problems, because free market capitalism drives the internationalization of labor, which drives mass immigration, you can see the gears turning in someone's head as soon as you say that. And they won't immediately just do a 180 overnight, but once the doubt is there, you can never get rid of it. And they have to exist in a state of constant cognitive dissonance to go along with it. And so that's why I say that it relies on people being in a bubble, because once people have access to that information, then the information will totally change what they think. Now, the second thing that you said, the second generalization I made. Remind me, what was it you said? I said.
Yeah. So on that point, yeah, it was basically that you said that Restore is worse than Labour. I believe you said to David.
Right. Okay. So the reason I say it's worse than Labour is because, in the context of all of the problems that nationalists frequently identify, a party like Restore Britain would absolutely take all of those problems and make them worse instead of better. The rhetoric might be more amenable, the things it says might be more amenable, but what it would actually do in practice is make all of those problems worse. And to go through the problems, well, what are the problems that nationalists often talk about? Obviously, the main one is immigration and demographics. Now, there's a reason why immigration has actually dropped under Labour compared to the Conservative governments that came before it. There's a reason why Boris Johnson's government produced the infamous Boris wave, which is one of the worst waves of immigration in the history of Britain. And that reason is because of right-wing economic ideology. That is what free market international capitalism does to a country. It will naturally result in endless mass immigration. Now, Labour, yes, has very much fallen into the same neoliberal capitalism as the Conservatives, but not quite to the same degree. Whereas a party like Restore Britain is ultimately fundamentally governed by free market international capitalism, maybe to an even greater extreme than the Conservative Party. And so what you would actually get in practice, if somebody like Rupert Lowe was to find himself the Prime Minister tomorrow, the rhetoric would be the most anti-immigration rhetoric you can imagine, and I can well imagine that illegal immigration would disappear. There would be no more asylum system. I can well imagine that happening. But much like the Boris wave, I could also imagine 5 million visas for highly skilled Indians. I can also imagine huge numbers of Africans. I can also imagine legal immigration would go through the roof for exactly the same ideological reasons that immigration skyrocketed under Boris Johnson, despite all his promises to the contrary, and for the exact same reason that it skyrocketed under Margaret Thatcher, despite all her promises to the contrary in 1979. Now, obviously, some of that's like the big issue, but the other issues that nationalists often talk about, well, one is housing, and people talk about house prices and rentals and housing availability. Well, again, the economic principles of somebody like Rupert Lowe are far less conducive to house building than the economic principles of Labour. So that problem would also get worse. And the argument would be made, well, if you're going to deport millions of people, which I'm skeptical they could actually do, because they would have to abandon their entire economic framework in order to do it, which they don't want to do. But let's imagine that somehow they did manage to make that happen. Well, I'm not convinced that would help to the degree that is claimed, because just because a house is empty, it doesn't automatically mean that somebody can actually live there, because if they live there, then they have to also work there. And if the jobs aren't there for them, removing, say, 100,000 foreigners from all of the social housing in Manchester and then replacing it with 100,000 white British people isn't necessarily just going to cause all those people to suddenly have jobs and suddenly have money to be able to maintain those houses. The point being is that it would actually take housing problems and also make housing problems worse. And then probably I'd say the third biggest problem that nationalists always talk about is sort of incompetent government, or sort of inept government that doesn't really give them the results they want. And I suppose I would point that to those previous two things as perfect examples, because you could put a party like Restore Britain in government, and the actual result of that party being in a term of government would be the complete opposite of what its support base would want. Like, it wouldn't have even necessarily done that on purpose. That's just what would happen. And so that's why I say that it's worse than Labour.
Yeah, but yeah, Alec, you say all these things like, oh, I imagine. Precisely. It's literally, most of what you said there is all in imagination. It's all conjecture. It's all hypothetical. So this is kind of it's what I always kind of push back on a lot, because you do have some good understanding, like, of a lot of topics, and you have some good takes on things, and we do agree on some things as well. But like I said, all these kind of finer details will be ironed out. We forget that obviously it's still a relatively new party, and in terms of what you said, in terms of, like, it would, in order to get elected, I think you said it would rely on, is it 40 or 30% of the electorate, like kind of putting themselves in a state of ignorance and isolation. But I went to a Restore. I obviously went to the Restore Britain branch meeting, and my first branch meeting, and I met many people there from many different backgrounds. They're not necessarily on X. They don't engage with the kind of the online sphere. They were just kind of normal people. Like former Labour voters, like Reform voters. Even new voters, like the kind of lost electorate that I mentioned. That people that have.
Oh shit, has he dropped again? Damn, it was going so well. Hope he hasn't dropped again.
Just give him a minute, he might come back.
Hopefully. Just to say, I don't know if you guys are gauging it in the audience or whatever. The listeners have found it quite interesting so far. Has to be said.
Oh, good. Good. And it was thanks for inviting me on. It's nice to do this space.
No stress at all. No stress at all. Right. Hang on, Dan. I think he's still in the thing, so speak invite incoming.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry about that.
Hey,
Yes, you can.
I seriously need to get a new phone. It's going on my it's going on my Christmas list. Don't worry. Honest to God, it's really doing my head in. But I'm sorry for that. So where did I get to? I think I was.
You mentioned about going to a branch meeting.
Yes, yeah. So I went to the branch meeting the beginning of this month, and like I said, I met all kinds of people there, people of different ages. You know, it was quite it's quite a diverse like demographic of people. And again, Alec, these people aren't in information bubbles. You know, they're not ignorant or they're not isolated. You know, they're just normal people, and they have normal concerns. And it got quite passionate because obviously there's a lot of people out there. You know, there's a real sense of anger and a real sense of frustration at the way things are run or have been running for the past years, decades even. And people just want change, and again, it's your characterization, and you make these kind of blanket statements. They're just not rooted in any kind of logic, because you've not been to I assume you've not been to obviously a branch meeting, a Restore branch meeting. And have you spoke to other Restore Britain members, or outside of the online sphere? Have you met some of these people? And again, you probably be surprised, because I think you say you speak a lot about like information bubbles or ideological bubbles, but I think you kind of put yourself in a bubble of your own, Alec, if it's fair to say, because you seem to make all these these kind of snap judgments, these kind of rash statements that have no substance to them, in all honesty. So I just kind of wanted to kind of get your take on that.
Okay, so when you went to this branch meeting and you talked to all these people, which I'm not disputing that you did, and as and I can well believe people were angry and aggrieved about all these various topics. What from your conversations and what people were saying, what did they actually want instead? If they weren't happy with the current system, what did they actually want instead?
Well, they wanted a common sense party that spoke for them, that kind of listened to their concerns. I mean, even in Wales, granted, like the immigration issue is not as bad as it is in England, but there is mass immigration is already impacting certain communities here as well. But again, it wasn't just immigration. Obviously, immigration is kind of like a hot topic issue, rightfully so. But it was about Islam. It was about the kind of the necessary changes in terms of Wales feeling left out and forgotten. That's kind of been a symptom of unfortunately our politics for a while, because obviously Wales has been traditionally a Labour heartland. And again, I've made a lot of these points in terms of that Wales is fundamentally quite socialist in its approach, because of obviously of having decades under Labour, and then obviously kind of feeling the brunt of Thatcher and her policies, and how they destroyed entire communities. And and obviously I've made a point of mentioning this in terms of my concerns with Rupert Lowe's own Thatcherite leanings. He says he's a libertarian. He loves the Austrian school. Again, all these are concerns of mine already. But that being said, I don't think that Rupert is an egocentric in the sense that Farage is, that whatever Nigel says goes. Rupert is at least amenable, because he's a typical English gentleman, and he listens to the people within his party who he respects, and who he personally appointed. Obviously, he wouldn't have put them in those positions. If he wanted an echo chamber, he would have probably hired like boomers, boomer Thatcherites like himself, but he didn't. So that shows a certain degree of character on his part and good judgment. Otherwise, yeah, it would be a personality cult, and I would totally get your reasoning why you would say that. But that is not what I see from where I'm standing.
So there's probably two points I would say to that. So the first point is that what you said to me when I asked, well, what do these people want instead? And as you pointed out, all they wanted was a common sense party. Well, this is why I characterize it as a grievance engine, because common sense is not a political ideology. Common sense is whatever the person saying common sense wants it to be. That isn't some sort of economic, social, or political framework. If somebody says that's common sense, then it basically means that's my opinion. So I would argue what you've then got is a room full of people with their own individual grievances, and they believe that their grievances need addressing, but they can't really articulate how they want it to be addressed. They want the problems to go away, but they can't tell you how. Like if you went to a Restore Britain branch meeting and you raised the question and said, okay, what does society look like when Britain is restored? What does the economy look like when Britain is restored? What does the political system look like when Britain is restored? I think, if I was you, I'd encourage you to actually ask that at a branch meeting, because I think the answer that you'll get, yeah, well, for a start, if the question is even answered, I think that whoever's answering it might look at you in confusion, because it's not a question they would even conceive that anybody would ask.
Again, Alec, how would you know that? And again, it's only one branch meeting. I've only, I didn't want to kind of, I've only asked some very general questions, but that was a certain frame of reference in terms of kind of, common sense politics. That's kind of the frame of reference, because they're just everyday people, average people. They're not online, so they may not necessarily see like the policy documents. But some are obviously more engaged than others. So again, this was one branch meeting, and there will be many others. So again, you were already kind of sliding into old habits there, slipping into old habits in terms of making these kind of rash statements. And yeah, those questions will be asked.
Not really, because the implication there, though, is that people have joined this party without even actually knowing what this party ideologically stands for. That's the implication of that, and it's a really frightening implication, because what the party actually stands for is conservative, liberal, free market, international capitalism. And it's basically, if these people, especially if they're Welsh people, if the idea of Margaret Thatcher being in government is absolutely abhorrent to them, which is totally fair enough, because it's abhorrent to me and it's abhorrent to most people. If the idea of Margaret Thatcher being dug up from the grave and stuck in government is abhorrent to them, then the idea that they would want to put Rupert Lowe in government is actually horrifying, because for all intents and purposes, he is literally her reanimated corpse in an ideological sense. And this is one of the things about, I'll explain to you just briefly. This is what I see when I look at somebody like Rupert Lowe, and I've seen him talk to people. I've watched these various interviews he's done. I watched the interview with Jacob Rees-Mogg. This is how he comes across to me. He comes across to me as the kind of man who sees other people not as people, but rather as tools and toys to be used to facilitate some kind of aim. That's how he comes across to me. And look, I'm 30 years old. I'm not a particularly old man, but I am a relatively wily man, and I'll say that by my own admission, because I think part of that might be because of my time in the army, and because it's such a raw, brutal environment. You become like a human lie detector very, very quickly, and you can judge what kind of people that someone is, just by having a conversation with them. And I can tell you for a fact that there is no way on this planet that I would listen to somebody like Rupert Lowe and trust a single word that comes out of that guy's mouth. And like that, I can't convince myself that he's a totally honest, upstanding, legitimate person, because everything about him screams to me the kind of person who will just say whatever he thinks the person in front of him wants to hear in order to give him money or attention. That is literally how it comes across, and I can't rationalize it being any other way. And his whole life story pretty much backs that up.
Right. I mean, it's just, again, like in terms of your, again, it's purely your opinion, right? In terms of that you think he sees people as just toys, as just, you know, tools, like instruments, just to kind of further his own. Now, don't get me wrong, like I'm quite cynical myself. You know, I'm, you know, inside every disappointed cynic, you know, inside every cynic is a disappointed idealist, right? And, you know, we have a right to be cynical in terms of, you know, the kind of hands we've been dealt in terms of our our politicians, our choice of politicians, shall we say. But, you know, maybe, you know, call me a hopeless optimist, or, you know, I mean, I tend to, like I said, you know, I believe in deeds over words. And I think, you know, Rupert has kind of proven, at least so far, in terms of what he's promised, he's delivered. And I do hope the kind of the rape gang inquiry, which will be coming out soon, you know, will be as hard hitting as he says it will be. And I think everyone can get behind that, you know, because, you know, Farage promised it, he didn't deliver, and Rupert made sure that he would promise, and, you know, that he would deliver that. So I think, you know, there's certain things that, yeah, I mean, I have my own concerns regarding, you know, his Thatcherite leanings. I mean, you know, everyone's aware of that, you know. But like I said, like kind of the rationale that I take is that you're gonna disagree with people, you know, on certain things, aren't you? You know, I don't think anyone's ever voted for a political party where they agree on 100% of what that party endorses, or what 100% of what that party puts to the public. They will see certain policies that, oh, you know, that looks good, you know, and, you know, they'll kind of agree on like the broader terms. Because again, like, you know, the average person is not going to go flicking through manifestos, are they? You know, a lot of them end up in the bin. They just want kind of, you know, digestible, easy policies that are, you know, that are approachable, you know. And, you know, that's the impression, you know, I got from, you know, going to my first Light Restore branch meeting. You know, these are just normal people, you know, and, you know, they want radical change, and they feel they've been let down by the two-party system. And I feel that you would agree with that, in terms of, you know, the kind of the two-party, the kind of flip-flopping between Labour and Conservative has kind of, you know, naturally run its course now. And I think, you know, there is definitely room for, you know, parties like Restore to kind of fill in that vacuum that is, you know, that I think a lot of people are attaching themselves to. And like I said, I've always said that I did it out of necessity, because I agree with at least 80 to 90% of what they are pushing. And, you know, that 10% can be ironed out, you know, at a later date. Again, it's not important. You never agree with 100% of the political program, you know. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I can't speak to anyone else, but that's kind of my perspective on it. So I just wanted to get some of your thoughts on that.
So when you, well, I tell you what, I guess I'll keep this really short. Two things. One, do you trust Rupert Lowe? And two, when you read all of the things that Rupert Lowe writes, or you've seen all the things that Rupert Lowe says, do you think that he is always telling you the truth?
Well, I've mentioned before that there are certain kind of mixed messaging with his online account and what he says in person. I've already mentioned that, Alek. And, you know, yeah, okay, it's, you know, it's a fledgling party. He's relatively new to Parliament. Don't forget, he's only been in Parliament for what, since 2024 as a Reform MP. I know he was in the European Parliament before, but in terms of like a parliamentary MP within the system, again, it's only been 2 years or so. So again, I feel that I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, like a lot of people are, you know. politics politics is compromise at the end of the day, and there's a certain degree of risk involved with that as well. So yeah, I mean, I trust him to a degree. Maybe not, maybe not some of his economics, but like I said, he's got people within his party who don't agree with him on economics either, or excuse me, or the role of the state. But again, like I said before, he surrounds himself with people that aren't his his own reflection, his own bubble, which is healthy, which is why I support it, at least so far. And in terms of where it's going, I think it does show a lot of promise. But again, it's still early doors, Alec. It's still we're barely 2 months. So the fact that there's all this purity spotting that I've noticed in terms of people, and I wanted to bring this up as well, Alec, because in terms of that email you sent, I really wanted to get to that because this kind of underhand tactics to kind of prove a point. I kind of want you to maybe at least kind of defend that in terms of where you were coming from in that, because I know you kind of gave your reasoning to David on the UNNN show to prove that that Restore is a Zionist party, which I do not agree with at all. But I just wanted to get your take on the reasoning behind the blatant dishonest tactics to try and expose something within Restore, even though it was just one branch organizer. And you thought that would somehow unravel the entire movement. I just don't understand where you were coming from with that. And it just kind of shows some desperation on your part, Alec, if I can be bold in saying that, But again, I want you to kind of speak to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can do that. I mean, to put it very briefly, the point of that exercise wasn't actually to prove anything one way or the other about Zionism or any of Rupert Lowe's other principles, because it's one of those things where it is apparent to absolutely everybody who isn't part of the anti-Zionist faction inside his party that Rupert Lowe is in fact a strong supporter of Israel and ultimately a Zionist. Like that is known. You go to people in Labour know that, people in the Conservatives know that, Jews know that, Muslims know that, Palestinians know that, I know that. The only people that do not think that Rupert Lowe is a Zionist are the people in his own party that don't want to believe that he is one. Everybody else is fully aware of it. So the point of the exercise wasn't to actually prove anything about his views. The point of the exercise was actually to prove that denial of his views is a pointless exercise. So that was the ultimate, reasoning behind it, and it did prove that, because the reality is that you could have asked him that, and he would have given you the same answer. Well, he might not have given it to you if he knew what answer you wanted to hear, and you've kind of implied that you don't fully trust him, which would suggest that there would be a risk that would happen. But it's like if you asked Charlie Downs it'd be a bit like that riddle of the two Guardians, where if you went to Charlie Downs and asked him what Rupert Lowe thinks, the answer that he'd give you would be totally different than if you went to Rupert Lowe and asked him what he thinks, or asked him what Charlie Downs thinks. I mean, I think this is how it comes across to me when you say the people he's surrounded himself with are these like young people whose views are maybe a bit different to his. What it looks like to me is somebody who has surrounded himself with minions who do not possess the kind of leadership or organizational capabilities to ever actually challenge him to take control of his party away from him, but people who will function as very good stooges, or who will be able to be deployed to occasionally say things that various disgruntled factions within his own party might believe, in order to prevent their sort of disgruntlement from manifesting in any serious way. That's how I look at that relationship between him and some of those people around him. Is I think they are there mainly to be stooges, rather than people to actually have any agency in their own right. And it would then beg me, it then begged me to ask the same question. So yes, some of these people around him, like for example, Charlie Downs is far more aligned with what me and you would say is nationalism than Rupert Lowe is himself. But again, like, do you think Charlie Downs is telling the truth? Do you think that he is saying that because he actually thinks that, or do you think he's saying that because Rupert Lowe's told him to say that?
Well, it was a bit of a it was kind of a paper thin argument, Alec, because you essentially made that argument on the UNN as well. It essentially just boiled down to you and David just saying back to each other, "Oh, they're just liars. They'll screw you over eventually." Again, it's this, it's there's no kind of substance behind, there's no kind of substance behind it. It's just, maybe you've seen certain patterns, you're recognizing certain patterns. So restore is just just the next step in terms of your own pattern recognition in terms of what you've seen. Maybe you think restore is just another extension of like the reform plantation. It's just another carbon copy. Would that be fair? Not to put words in your mouth, but would that be fair to say?
Well, yeah, it is just another. Well, I look at it as a life support machine for the Conservative Party, which is also what Reform UK is. But again, like, are you telling me in in your assessment, do you believe that Rupert Lowe is an honest man who will always tell you the truth? If you went and asked him a question, what do you think about X, Y, Z, and you asked him that publicly, do you believe that he would give you an honest answer? Or do you think the answers he would give would differ depending on who was asking him the question?
Well, he's a politician, Alec, and obviously I believe he's more principled than your average politician, because like I said, he's backed up his he's backed up his deeds, so far. Again, I can't speak to the future. I'm not going to make these kind of hypotheticals, these kind of, these, I've got a crystal ball. I can't predict, what's going to happen further down the line, weeks down the line, months down the line, But again, like from my impression, from what I've seen so far of both Rupert and the movement as a whole, yes, there is certain things that I disagree with, and I've made a point of that. But at the end of the day, in terms of the stepping stone that Restore will provide and the vehicle that it will, the kind of vehicle that it is, it will obviously root out the uni-party system. Obviously, I don't want to be too optimistic about our chances of winning 2029. Again, stranger things have happened. But I mean, in terms of the first past the post system, yeah, I mean, we may not get, it may not be a majority. I don't want to kind of put all my eggs in one basket there. There's a lot to do. It's 3 years basically. So 3 years. So, but again, like that's kind of what was frustrating to me in terms of listening to you and David, and another thing as well, that the kind of people that would support something like Restore, kind of they lack in world wisdom, or they kind of lack in discipline. I mean, maybe I'm kind of new to I'm new to kind of joining political parties myself.
I'll tell you why I said that, and it's because, right, if you've got somebody or like a team of people who are routinely expressing two contradictory things to different groups of people, then anyone who applies world wisdom can only logically conclude that one of the things expressed must be a lie, because two contradictory things can't simultaneously be true. So if you've got Charlie Downs saying one thing and Rupert Lowe saying something else, and then you've got Rupert Lowe saying one thing in Parliament and saying another thing on his X account, and then Rupert Lowe saying one thing in an interview with person A and then another thing in an interview with person B, the logical conclusion is that the man is a liar, who is at least someone in the room is getting lied to. And anyone that is listening to this, anyone that's ever spoken to me, whether it's there's people could be sitting in here from Antifa for all I know, but anyone who's ever spoken to me knows full well that someone can ask me a question. even if they completely hate my political ideology, even if they're some radical left-wing hardcore communist, they can ask me a question. They will get the exact same answer off me as if you asked me a question, or if anybody else in here asked me a question. I would never give different answers to different people. And you must already have recognized that, because you've even mentioned it yourself, that there's mixed messages and there's different things being said. So the point being is that if you're sort of aware, if you're aware that there is a possibility that anything that is coming out of Rupert Lowe's mouth might be a lie, what hope is there? Because how can you then think, when he's promising to do this, promising to do that, how can you then think that that's actually true when you've already recognized there's a possibility that some of it might just be lies? Like, what? How can you go along with it, knowing that someone in the room is getting bullshitted?
Well, the fact that like there's that he's still untested in terms of wider political power. Yes, he's an MP, but obviously the Great Yarmouth local council elections will be kind of a proving ground for what Restore can do at a local level. But again, they're still untested. They're still again 2 months into existing. And yeah, there will be some things that will seem that there will be some contradictory things here and there. But you don't see kind of Rupert kind of raking Charlie Downs over the coals over, oh, you said this, you said that. It seems still to be a very cohesive party, still kind of harmonious, despite some of these internal differences. And you've got people like Harrison Pitt kind of rubbing elbows with like Renard Camus and Martin Sellner, these kind of figures, who I admire myself, but again, this, Rupert is not kind of disavowing, any of his radicals, the people who have already joined the party. There's no kind of, that was obviously Reform's mistake, because they went into a complete purity spiral, and now they're just an absolute joke of a party. But again, you don't see this happening. And I've seen you say plenty of times that these sorts of people, the people within the Restore movement, people like, you could say people like me, people like Steve Laws or people like Zuma, they'll be like kicked to the curb, at the first opportunity. And again, you can't qualify that, Alek, at least not yet. So
Well, no,
again,
I know it will happen. Like I know it's going to happen.
How do you know that will happen, though?
Right, I know it's going to happen because you guys are getting told something different to what another demographic is getting told, and that other demographic that we're talking about is one that makes up a significant chunk, might even be about half of all the people that have joined Restore Britain, and that chunk is the disaffected Tory chunk. It's people that, even if they've never been members of the Conservative Party, they're people that are basically aligned with the Conservative Party. Mostly we're talking like old school Tories, so we're talking like Thatcherites, the Farage type people, those kind of people. That's probably half the support base of Restore Britain as a party. Now, the difference between those two demographics, so like you guys, the nationalist demographic, the kind of ethnocentric demographic, the online demographic, and those people, is that those people by and large tend to have more money than you guys. And I'm not saying that makes them better. I'm just saying they tend to have more money because they tend to be older, and they tend to be people who have benefited from what comes with that. There'll be boomers and Gen Xers who have got more wealth, so they can give more money to Restore Britain than you guys can. Okay, that is what it is. They also tend to be people who are more politically organized. Now, the organization of the political right is nothing by comparison to the left, but they tend to be the kind of people that in the Conservative Party would actually turn up to branch meetings, would organise clubs, would organise events. And again, the right is nothing like the left. Its ability to organise is pathetic by comparison. But they're the people who have organisational power compared to you guys. And again, that's not the fault of you guys. It's because, nationalists and your demographic simply do not have the political experience and tradition and knowledge as what they have. So, you guys might have it in 30 years, but you don't have it now. So that demographic, that disaffected Tory demographic has more money than you guys, more organization than you guys. So when you've got these two contradictory ideas being expressed, on the one hand, it is the ethnocentric nativism of the nationalist demographic. And then on the other hand, it's the free market international capitalists of the disaffected Tories. Those two ideologies and worldviews are completely irreconcilable. They are irreconcilable because one is fundamentally collectivist and nationalist, and one is fundamentally individualistic and internationalist. So they are completely irreconcilable. One of those groups will, don't know how long it will take, but one of those groups will be kicked to the curb. It's impossible, because as soon as those two groups become aware of the inconsistencies of the other, and as soon as they become aware that they're both being told different things by the leadership of the party, the pressure will mount on the leadership of the party, i.e. Rupert Lowe, to pick a side. He will have to pick one of those two demographics. He's never going to convince you guys to adopt free market international capitalism, because that would mean giving up. That would mean giving up nativism and giving up any desire for fixing demographic problems. And he's never going to convince a bunch of disaffected Tories to give up free market capitalism, because for them to give that up would be a brain-breaking abandonment of their entire profit-centric worldview. So one of you two groups is going to be kicked to the curb. So is he going to kick to the curb the group of people who have very little money, very little organizing power, very little political experience, and a large number of whom are active but only online? Or is he going to kick to the curb the people that can donate him stupid amounts of money, that do possess the political infrastructure that he would actually need to win elections, and who can actually reliably and consistently turn up to organize political activity? And I can tell you now, Rupert Lowe in his position, because he's a very mercantile man, that's why he's worth about £100 million, because his entire worldview is a mercantile one. When somebody like Rupert Lowe is presented with those two choices, given the fact that this disaffected Tory faction of Thatcherites and capitalists actually aligns with his own worldview, he will pick them, and you guys will be thrown out on your ear, just like what happened in Reform, just like what happened in Homeland, just like will happen in every single party that just exists as a continuity Tory party. It's the only logical outcome that could possibly take place, which is why when you say, well, how do I know that's going to happen? That's how I know it's going to happen. If you think there's a fault in any of the logic there, then please explain to me.
Dan, just before you respond, I'll give you a chance to respond now. I want to jump in after you respond. I just wanted to get that in there. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So again, Alec, again, this is all conjecture. This is all like conjecture. Like, it may prove to be true. We can't say. Again, it's all we're dealing in hypotheticals here. So, but the fact that Restore appeals to like a broad group of people, former Labour voters, like for instance, not just of that kind of Tory Thatcherite mold, because geez, like people in Wales, obviously people in Wales have a certain history with Thatcherism, but in terms of what Restore is offering, and in terms of their approach, the nativism, because I do believe they are a nativist party, maybe not a nationalist one. I recognise that they're not nationalist. There may be some more, like Charlie Downs, I see would be more nationalist. He's kind of less individualistic. He's more kind of in line with his kind of Christian faith. So he believes in more of a collective. But again, that's not neither here or there. But again, this broad spectrum of people, some of whom, many of whom I met at the branch meeting, and many of who I will continue to kind of form like relationships with and bonds with. And again, all these, it's still very early doors. But again, a lot of what you said, Alec, is conjecture. It may come to pass, but we can't say for sure, can we? Really. But I just wanted to kind of, sorry, Voice of the Valley. Did you want to jump in then? You said.
Yeah, all I wanted to do was give a little bit of my not perspective on the actual debate. That's not what I'm here to do. Maybe steer it in a direction that I hope is going to be helpful, but obviously for myself and people listening as well. That right now, it seems at the moment, it seems as though it's been very heavy on cross-examining Restore in terms of the policies, in terms of Rupert Lowe's character, which I think is perfectly well and good to do, absolutely. I was going to suggest maybe either yourself, Dan, or Alec, maybe getting started on, obviously, it's Restore Britain versus NRP. What would the alternative be? And I know just from my time on X and stuff like that, in the political discourse, one of the main criticisms of like NRP IC, for example, is either lack of broad public appeal and maybe having a focus on a timeline that's too long. I don't know, maybe anybody wants to speak to that. I'm not speaking to that myself, but I think having that discussion as well, looking at what NRP is going to bring to the table as well, would be useful for people, especially myself and anybody listening. So I don't know if anybody wants to steer the conversation in that direction as well, because I've got about 30 or so minutes left.
I can if you want. So the only way that we're ever going to actually convince people to agree with a national political program is to persuade them that it is good. If the majority of people in Britain already believed in third position nationalism as an ideology, then it would already exist in government. So we wouldn't have to create political parties to try and put it in government. So for someone to say, well, your party doesn't actually have public appeal, well, no, it doesn't now because it doesn't exist, or it hasn't existed until recently. And the only way it's going to get public appeal is by convincing people that it's actually good. If people already agreed with that political program, then we wouldn't have needed to create the NRP as a party, because a party that reflected it would already be in government. So I would say to anyone that said that's not a valid criticism, because it's a criticism that someone would give if they didn't understand how the political system actually functions, and they thought that the sole purpose of political entities was just to reflect whatever they thought people currently thought, rather than have any kind of vision or ideas for the future, which is actually the point of revolutionary and radical political movements, is to actually think about the future, not just be populist bandwagons for whatever people happen to think in the present. The second thing that you brought up was, remind me what it was. I thought it went out. There was that, and there was something else.
I usually see it in the context of demographic change and stuff like that. The criticism that's often levied, at least from how I understand it, is the focus on a time frame that would, say, be too long.
Right.
By the time you would actually get any kind of meaningful success, it would be too late. That's kind of how I read it anyway.
Okay, so the reality is, to actually create a political movement that is capable of governing a country and capable of organizing a people, it takes as long as it takes until the work is legitimately done. There is no way of cheating that process. There is no way of speeding that process up. And in fact, the more people try and take shortcuts, the faster they are going to fail, and the worse the problem is getting. Again, I will use the ultimate example to that of what happened during Boris Johnson's tenure as Prime Minister, where people believed that they could slow down the effects of demographic change by voting for the seemingly hardest right rhetoric on immigration, but what they then actually got was the greatest rate of immigration ever. That will continue to happen. The more people try and shortcut that process, the worse their situation is going to get. And parties, populist right-wing parties, far from being stepping stones to fixing those problems, are actually just wasting even more time and resources, because they actually move people even further away from it, because in practice they do the opposite. So when people say, well, this could take you years to actually develop and years to actually get into government, well, from the point where people decide actually populism isn't going to work and we are going to have to create a genuine ideologically grounded party, it's still going to take them the same amount of time. Like if someone, let's say someone came along and created the NRP in 15 years time, it would still take them 15 years from that point. It wouldn't speed up. They can't skip the work by just leaving it until that point. It still takes the same amount of time to legitimately and genuinely persuade large numbers of people. So it takes as long as it takes, but the more people panic and get sucked into demographic doomsday cults, all that's going to do is cause them to fail even quicker and even harder. It's like a drowning man panicking and then just drowning in 1 minute instead of taking 5 minutes to drown. All they're doing is actually making it less likely that they're ever going to fix the problem. And so that is why, that again, that's a criticism someone would give out if they were going through the mindset of having a panic response to the demographic issues of today. As soon as they're not having that panic response, they'll realize that actually it's the only sensible thing that you can do.
Yeah, I want to push back on that. So demographic doomsday cults, Alek. I mean, obviously you are aware of where we are in terms of our demographics at 74%, and that could be a lot lower. So you say you want an ethnocentric, stable society, but how are you going to get that if it's going to take years of work? How will you achieve that if we become a minority and NRP doesn't? Obviously, we'll just be smothered in the crib, because you won't have the people that you need to attract. Because I assume you want to attract, the native people, of Britain. But how will that be achieved if it's going to take years of work? Whether that's 20 years, 30 years. I mean, it took Labour 45 years to get a majority government. Do you think realistically we have that kind of time frame? And I just want to get your thoughts on that, because it just seems illogical to me. Why, again, don't get me wrong, you're kind of doing the groundwork, you're kind of setting the party up, from its inception, and you're building it. Respect that. But however, we are in the position. It's not, it's not a doomsday cult. It's literally the figures that we have available to us right now, and that was back in 2021. So, do you think we're going to be in a state of demographic stability where a party like NRP and other nationalist parties like British Dems, who I would want to succeed, on a level for sure. But do you think that we are going to be in that position realistically if we don't back, again, a party like Restore Britain that is committed to at least reversing mass, not just deporting all illegal migrants, but it wants to reverse mass immigration. It wants to undo the Boris wave. These are concerns that we have, and obviously, it would kind of benefit you guys as well in terms of, again, I'm not saying that you would ever support, because I know you're ideologically opposed to something like Restore. That's your opinion, but the fact that they are addressing these issues like demographics, is important, and it will be important going forward, because you're going to need a stable demographic in order to attract, your potential, future members, future councillors. So I just want to know what you say to that.
Yeah, the worse that the problem gets, the more, and as time goes on, these problems, not just demographic problems, but economic problems and people's disgust with the political system, those issues will get worse over the next decade. And the worse those issues get, the more and more it's going to be, the more and more people will actually start supporting things that are more radical, like the NRP, and the more and more people will kick to the curb, populist crap. And the reason why is because deep down, overwhelming majority of the people who support things like reform, restore, etc., deep down, most of the people supporting it actually know that it's crap, and they know that it can't do what it says it's going to do, but they support it because whilst they think things are going to be bad in future, they're not bad enough yet that they can't afford not to. But as soon as things actually do start to become bad, it doesn't become tenable to maintain that illusion anymore, because you realize that actually the only way to help yourself is by supporting something that is actually genuinely ideologically grounded, that does actually have a coherent vision and a coherent set of answers, and that is run by people who are totally ideologically committed, totally incorruptible, and full well that those people have never told lies, and everything they tell you will be true, even if it's things that you don't want to hear. And this, I would say, a good example to sort of show this is to look at maybe Reform is a good party to draw on, because Restore hasn't been in elections yet, but Reform, being in the same vein, is the perfect party to draw on. Reform UK is the kind of party where people who live in places where issues like immigration are creeping up on them will support it. But people that live in places where immigration is already a life-altering serious issue will never vote for something like that, because they know that it's a bunch of crap, and they know that it won't actually fix those problems. The reason why Matt Goodwin never had a hope in hell of winning in Gorton in that by-election, it wasn't because the immigrants voted against him. He didn't have a hope in hell of winning because a constituency of people that have been absolutely devastated by mass immigration to the point where half the constituency is foreign have absolutely no use for who is basically a gobshite like Matt Goodwin, who they know full well is just promising things that he can't actually do, and is just saying whatever to try and get a vote off them. And the point I'm ultimately making is that as the situation gets worse, people will naturally turn to parties like the NRP, because they know that we are not actually full of crap, and they know that we are actually serious people with a serious political vision, and it's a coherent political vision. It can actually withstand any amount of scrutiny that anyone throws at it, and you're never going to have the same sort of holes being picked in it as what people pick in parties like Reform or Restore or anything in that part of the political spectrum. So yes, I'm aware that every year that goes by, problems like the demographic problem do get worse. But I also know that the worse those problems get, the more people will actually realize that they can't afford to mess around with garbage anymore.
Dan, you there? No. Oh, there we go. Oh.
Hello?
Yeah, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, so you were saying, Alek, about I think you mentioned it to David Clues as well. You mentioned about the political situation getting worse, that people will be more willing to kind of reconcile some of these issues because they have to survive. So would you, just to kind of turn your own logic on yourself, would that not be a sense of a somewhat an act of desperation? Because I know you use that argument for Restore a lot. Would that not be an act of desperation for a lot of people to turn to parties like NRP as well?
One of the big differences between the NRP and virtually any other political party that I can think of in the whole of Britain, especially anything that is related to the populist right, is that it is in no way, shape, or form related to either the old left or the old right. It is not related to the Conservative Party. It is not related to the Labour Party. It is a genuine third position party. It is a genuine third position nationalist party. You know, it's social. Its social political ideal is related to nativism. Oh, shit.
Oh, I heard an oh shit, and then it went off. Hang on a minute. Oh, I think you might have just, I don't know whether he dropped his phone or something. I don't know. Give it a second. Just want to thank you both. Hopefully, Alec, you can hear me, if nothing else. But to you and Dan for massively helping out with running this. You've made it extremely easy to run from a moderation perspective. Like I said, usually the less you hear of the ref, the better. So we'll give it a minute and let's see if he comes back. Hope you guys have enjoyed this, by the way, guys. You guys who are listening, apologies as well due to load time, and also that it's my first space. I won't be accepting any speakers on this one. Maybe it's something we can do on the next one. But if anybody, my suggestion would be if anybody wants to invite both of the speakers to any spaces they want to set up themselves, if they want to ask their own specific questions, then you can set up their own space for that and invite them. Yeah, maybe that's just something which we can do for next time. Phone died. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. He's still in there as a speaker on my screen. I don't know if anybody can see what it looks like on the stream. He's still here. Oh, there we go. Right, he's back as a listener. So I think he's just been rejoined. I'll quickly invite him up. Oh, there we go. Should be in now.
Can you hear me okay, mate?
Yes, all good, mate. All good.
Oh, sorry.
So, sorry, I had technical issues then. I've just gone on my laptop. But as I was saying, yeah, it's actually got its own coherent ideology. Socially, it's nativist. Economically, it is socialist. Politically, it is effectively totalitarian. But you know, these things actually make it different than every other political party, and they give it a reason to exist. And so anybody that supports something like the NRP can only really do it by freeing themselves from the containment shackles of the old left and the old right. It's the kind of party that it's impossible for someone to support unless they do genuinely believe in it, and that's what actually makes it much more survivable. And that is what happened with the Labour Party and how the Labour Party came into existence. People supported it instead of things like the Liberal Party because they actually believed that it was better. And I think the whole mindset of people to politics needs to change, and it will change. I said, as people become genuinely genuinely worse off, their mindset will change, because politics no longer becomes something like a hobby. It becomes something which is a necessity, because when you realize when the stakes are real, people's behavior, including how they vote, is genuinely very different. You know, how people tell you on the street if you talk to them that they're going to vote is not the same as how they will actually vote when the stakes are real in a voting booth. How people will tell you on the internet that they will vote is not the same as when the stakes are real. And the NRP is the kind of party that people will vote for when the stakes are real, rather than when the stakes don't really exist. And that point might be in 5 years, it might be in 10 years. But the process of creating that infrastructure and competency and preparedness for government, that has to be done now, because if that isn't done now, it's no good showing up at that time. It's no good showing up once people have already crossed the Rubicon, because they've already crossed the Rubicon without you. And if you know where to be seen until then, they're not going to be interested.
Well, I mean, it's like don't get me wrong. I see a lot of merits in kind of third positionism. I'm not a third positionist myself. Obviously, nationalism is quite a broad church, but again, Alek, in terms of trying to make third positionism not only palatable but politically viable, what's the time scale here? Do we really have 20, 30 years? Like I said, it took the Labour Party 45 years to get a majority government. So I'm just we can argue we can argue the merits of third positionism. We can argue the merits of third positionism all day long, but at the end of the day, in terms of realistically, if I'm allowed to be something of a cynic here, it's the time frame. What kind of time frame are we looking at? If it is going to be 34 years, will it already be too late by then?
Well, look, I mean, if you think that right-wing populism is going to slow down or prevent demographic disaster, then my advice to you is prepare to be demographically destroyed, because it will actually achieve in practice the complete opposite of what you think it will. And the more time that people electing governments or parties like Reform or Restore, which I don't think has any prospect of ever forming a government because it's even shoddier than Reform, but that's a different conversation. Electing parties like that would actually be the quickest way to demographically devastate Britain. Like there's no doubt in my mind that that is the case. And it's like if Reform formed a government in 2029, I think that the amount of immigration that would follow it would put the Boris wave in the shade. Likewise, I think if Restore did, the same would happen. And it's not because of the rhetoric; it's because of once you understand the economic principles at play, you realise that the rhetoric means nothing, because the economic principles will govern everything, and those parties are governed by money more than they are governed by anything else. And so you realize that because immigrants equals money, you realize that they will just do the complete opposite of what the rhetoric says. And if you think immigration's bad now, wait until you get a party like that in, it will be even worse. And so actually, my advice to people is, if you don't actually want to face demographic doomsday, toss those garbage populist parties in the bin where they belong, and actually come and invest your time in things like the NRP, because it's the kind of party that will actually prevent those problems from happening, rather than the kind of party that will come out with all the rhetoric you want to hear while simultaneously digging the hole even deeper.
So you firmly believe there will be, not only a Farage wave, but there will be a low wave as well. Is that what you're saying, Alek? Yeah.
Well, in political principle, yes. In practice, no, because I don't think either of those two parties will ever get into government, for the reason that they are so awful as parties that the majority of the population would vote for literally anything to keep them out of government, in the same way that 100 years ago people used to vote for literally anything just to keep communists out of government. Because the majority of people, the people who actually look at it objectively and rationally, which is most people, and if people are genuinely fearful, they actually will be compelled to not be cognitively dissonant. Anyone that, like, the majority of the population can see exactly what the consequences of parties like those in government would be, and will do anything to avoid having to elect them. I don't think either of those parties will ever actually form a government. But what I think they will do is just waste a lot of people's time and money that they could actually spend creating parties that are actually good, and creating or building parties that can actually do something.
Well, again, it's all up in the air, Alex. So we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. But I'm not sure how you are for time, because I've got I've got to be in work early tomorrow. So, boys, I don't know whether you want that to be a good time to, maybe for closing statements. I'm not sure how this works.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. So, obviously, we had a technical issue at the start with yourself, Dan. But I thought it might be fitting, seeing as I gave you the first word, I'd give Alek the last. So I don't know if you want to give your concluding statement on everything that you've spoken about today, the responses, etc., and then Alek can close us out with his closing statement, sorry, and his closing remarks.
Yeah, so obviously we didn't get around to some of the subjects that I wanted to discuss today, but again, there's always time for that on another space. But yeah, I feel that, in terms of where I am currently, I'm comfortable in the position that I'm in terms of my support. There's still a lot of events coming up which I want to be a part of, and the idea of this space was to kind of get a lot of these things out in the open, because, like I said, me and Alek have had like interactions on X. Not always, not always friendly, but I think we kind of needed to establish not only some level of common ground, but also in terms of where we disagree, and also we do fundamentally disagree, on many things. But again, I do feel personally that he does present a lot of his so-called opinions, as fact, and that it's just something it's something that just kind of frustrates me. But again, I've nothing against you personally, Alek. Obviously, you seem knowledgeable in many fields, but so that was kind of the nature of the debate, and I kind of wanted to keep it as transparent as possible. But yeah, I'm still kind of on board the restore Britain train, at least for now. So yeah, and hopefully further down the line, months down the line, there'll be kind of more of a cohesive framework. There'll be more kind of policy papers coming out. Obviously a certain amount of trepidation in terms of reading the economic one, but we'll get to that, I suppose. Again, I will always put like people of Wales, my people, above party. So if I feel that Restore is going to kind of betray them in any way, then obviously I will stand by my principles. But at the moment, at least, barely 2 months into it, I'm on board. So yeah.
Alek, closing time is yours.
So, what I could ultimately summarize is the key difference is that Restore Britain is the continuity Conservative Party. I know in the minds of a lot of people that support it, it is like a revolutionary machine that is designed to usher in a new kind of politics. But actually, what it is a reactionary machine that is designed to prolong the life of an old bankrupt kind of politics. Whereas a party like the NRP is a genuinely revolutionary and radical political party that has a genuine and complete political program, which anyone here can go and read the national agenda of the party and its 20 goals. We decided to call it 20 goals, but the point being is that agenda is real. That agenda does exist. That is a complete and coherent vision for what a national community would look like. That is what we want Britain to look like. And no other political party in Britain has produced anything like that. No other party in Britain has a set of goals like that. And my other piece of advice, not just to yourself, Dan, but to anybody else that is listening, I would suggest, regardless of what party you think is good, regardless of what politician you think is good, this is the piece of world wisdom I would offer to people. Regardless of the rhetoric that comes out of somebody's mouth, and regardless of the things that somebody says, and whether you think the things that somebody says are good or not, if you think that there is a possibility that the person isn't actually telling you the truth, it doesn't matter how good the things they are saying to you are, because it could just be a complete lie. And so my advice to people would be that if you are in a political party and you sit there having this niggling doubt and worry in the back of your mind that what the people leading it are telling you isn't actually true, my advice is leave and get away from it. Because if you already think that, then there's a reason why you already think that. And like no functional political movement exists in a state where the people in it know they're being lied to or think they're being lied to, but just persist in going along with it anyway. And so my advice to people was whatever political movement or party you're in, if you're sitting there supporting something, but you think that it might just be a complete con, then that should be a red flag that it actually is a complete con. And that alone should cause you to then walk out the door and never come back. Doesn't matter how good doesn't matter how good it sounds what somebody says to you. If it's a lie, then it counts for nothing. And nobody, even people that ideologically despise the NRP and its third position national agenda and everything that it stands for, nobody will ever say that I or the party are liars. Nobody will ever say it. Nobody in it believes that. Nobody outside of it will say that, because it fundamentally isn't true. Everything is honest, everything is genuine, and the national agenda is the genuine goal that the party works for.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to you both. I'll just quickly go back over to Dan and back over to Alec in case, just if you want to plug any social medias. Obviously, both of your X accounts are in the title of this, but if there's anything you want to plug or to make any of the listeners aware of now that you haven't already said, now is the time to do it.
Yeah, please. Just want to plug Outpost Media, because I'm a writer and contributor to it. We're doing a lot of good stuff in terms of presenting like a fresh nationalist perspective on news and other stories. We're going through a bit of a transition at the moment, but yeah, give us a follow.
Alec, yourself?
Obviously, I would encourage anybody that is listened. I would encourage anybody to, have a read of our party program. You can find it on our website. You can find links to it on our X or any of our other social media accounts. nationalrebirthparty.org.uk/agenda. Read our political program. Obviously, I'm on there as well. But if you're going to read one thing, go and read the agenda and program of the party, because it is unlike anything that exists in British politics. So thank you very much. It's been a nice evening. It's been a decent space. So thank you to both of you.
And thank you to both of our speakers. Obviously, you can follow those as well, guys. Thank you to everybody that's tuned into the space. Thank you to everybody that's watching this on the stream as well. And I'll be looking forward to doing this in the future. Maybe there'll be some things coming out of both NRP and Restore camps in the future. I suppose we'll see. But yeah, thank you ever so much, ladies and gentlemen. And I don't know, whatever else we're identifying as nowadays. And yeah, and catch you all very, very soon. Until next time, thank you all. Awesome. And also, I forgot to mention on the space. God damn it. I forgot to mention on the space. Thank you to all who followed me on X over the course of that space. I completely forgot about that. And yeah, thank you all for tuning into the stream. I'll quickly just come over and check your guys' chats a bit quick whilst I have the time. If I just quickly go here. I've only got about 5 minutes, so I'll just have to quickly do this. Oh, why can't I open the live? Okay, let's try this. Let's try it this way instead. Hope you guys have enjoyed. If you are still here, YouTube is not behaving for some reason. There we are. Don't want to do that. Go away. Not you guys. Okay, let's have a look. Latest debate. Yerbury. he's not improving or getting more interesting with time. To be fair, I found him quite interesting. I found what a lot of what he had to say quite interesting as well. So yeah, think it'll be something to have more conversations with in the future. I actually really enjoyed that. A massive thank you again to Alek and to Dan for being so easy to moderate for my first time. But yeah, really enjoyed that, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into the stream. I'm gonna go, so we're back in work early in the morning, so this is all fun. Politics numbers, if we all stop picking shit out of pepper and give all of our support. Which party best represents our people? We can swing the Overton window. You've absolutely seen that. Not just in the case of political parties as well, but just with activism being completely unapologetic about it. You know what I mean? So yeah, you've absolutely seen that Overton window shift, and it's only going to shift more and more as the clock increases to 2029, the next sort of big election. You know, I think a lot of people, understandably so, have sort of given up hope in Wales from really big, meaningful change at this May 7th election. You know, all right, I'm going to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. So a massive thank you to all whom have tuned in. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that you find it useful, and thank you as well. I noticed you said James there. Thank you to all of your support at our events. Professionalism is top notch. I do my best in that regard, and thank you so much for your support as well, for engaging in the chat, for engaging in the comments, for anybody engaging in the space. Thank you all ever so much, and I will see you again next time. Diolch yn fawr, thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr, see you next time. And hopefully we'll be back on some more commentary train in the near future as well. But fair to say, things have gotten a lot more busy in this camp recently. So we're doing our best. Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you again very soon. Godspeed.